Alarms have been raised by Vietnam and the Philippines over repeated violations of maritime rules in the South China Sea as Beijing continues its territorial claims. The waters are a highly contested region and faces rival ownership claims from China, Vietnam, Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines and Taiwan. Over the last few months, Beijing has increased its military presence in the area. Diplomatic relations between the nations, which have laid claim to the islands, are already extremely strained. The recent construction of bunkers on some of the atolls points to China preparing to protection against air missile strikes, raising the prospect of a potential conflict, sparking World War III fears. The islands and surrounding reefs have been the subject of a bitter and long-running territorial dispute, with China, Malaysia, Taiwan, Vietnam and the Philippines all laying claim to parts of the archipelago. And now, Vietnam and the Philippines have held a virtual meeting to discuss rules of governance over the region. Vietnam's Prime Minister Nguyen Xuan Phuc said in the meeting, while the entire world is stretched thin in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic, irresponsible acts and acts of violation of international law are still taking place, affecting the environment of security and stability in certain regions, including our region. Mr. Phuc went on to, while the region promotes the full and strict compliance of the rules of governing the region and making every effort to establish an effective code of conduct with China, there are still problems. He said, international institutions and international law are being seriously challenged. The Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte echoed Mr. Phuc's comments and called on all parties to follow the laws that govern the sea. He said even as the region struggled to contain COVID-19, alarming incidents in the South China Sea occurred. We call on the parties to refrain from escalating tension and abide by responsibilities under international law. This month, Taiwan deployed Marines to the Pratas Islands amid reports China would be conducting military drills in the area. According to a Ministry of National Defense official, an undisclosed number of Taiwanese Marines were deployed to the region as part of a training mission. The source told Focus Taiwan the mission was aimed at strengthening the defense capabilities as well as improving logistical and equipment maintenance skills of the Taiwanese Coast Guard officers. The move comes after Japan's Kyodo News reported last month how the People's Liberation Army of China were planning to hold large-scale beach landings in the area. It is believed the beach landing trainings are reportedly to simulate the takeover of the Pratas Islands, an area considered to be significant for Beijing. The islands sit in a strategic crossroads which Chinese warships would have to pass when travel to the Pacific. Last month, the communist nation held terrifying simulations in the disputed area. The drill involved China's People's Liberation Army Marine Corps and reportedly demonstrates how the communist nation's forces could project power across the contested waters. The Marine Corps or PLANMC undertook an anti-piracy exercise near the Paracel Islands. The drills showed off the Corps' capabilities to China's neighbors at a time where tensions are increasingly growing in the area. There are also ongoing disputes with the communist nation and the US after both flexed their military might in the region. According to reports this week, threats Korea's Air Force planes were spotted flying into Chinese territory. Even as the region struggled to contain COVID-19, alarming incidents in the South China Sea occurred, he said. We call on the parties to refrain from escalating tension and abide by responsibilities under international law. Stretching from China in the north to Indonesia in the south, the waterway encompasses 3.6 million square kilometers, 1.4 million square miles. China claims more than 80% of the South China Sea and backs up its claim with a 1947 map that shows vague dashes, the so-called 9-dash line. Vietnam, the Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia and Taiwan claim parts of the same maritime area. In recent years, the Philippines and Vietnam have become the most vocal opponents to China's claims in the areas that overlap with their own. But despite several run-ins with Chinese ships, they have to weigh their response against the prospect of losing the backing of one of the region's biggest investors. Over the weekend, for example, the Philippines Department of Energy said it is pushing to proceed with a joint exploration with China for resources in the disputed sea. But Southeast Asian leaders must also account for another major power on whom they depend, the U.S. In recent months, the U.S. has said it will prioritize the deployment of its forces to the Asia-Pacific region from other areas in the face of growing competition with China. That is raising the chances of a conflict in the South China Sea, experts have said. We're going to make sure we're postured appropriately to counter the People's Liberation Army, a Secretary of State Michael Pompeo said in remarks Thursday. We think that's the challenge of our time, and we're going to make sure we have resources in place to do that. In a draft statement, ASEAN leaders noted concerns over land reclamations, recent developments and serious incidents in the South China Sea. China is always advancing its pieces on the South China Sea chessboard, a senior Southeast Asian diplomat said. Beijing took advantage of the Asian financial crisis in the late 1990s and the SARS outbreak to push its claims. He added, if there is a space, they move. As Washington and Beijing continue to exchange barbs over everything from trade and COVID-19 to supply lines in Hong Kong, several ASEAN leaders on Friday called for the need for the bloc to work closely together. ASEAN should cooperate to strengthen regionalism, avoid being forced to take sides and become a bridge for these powerful nations to interact with the region, Thai Prime Minister Prayuth Chan-o-cha said. Use ASEAN's view on Indochina to the maximum benefit.